Hi, my name is Steve Rahi. I'm a cloud solutions architect focused on management technologies. Today's discussion is part 2 of our series focused on groups as they relate to Intune. And today's session will be focused on group attributes. This is part 2 of the series. The first part introduced the topic. Today we will be digging a little bit deeper into the idea of groups. Again, groups being a component very integral to Intune to be able to do all sorts of things such as deliver configurations, applications, scope out security focus through role-based access control, and so forth. So today we're going to start digging a little bit deeper. The idea of this session is to show you what's possible, focused on specifically group attributes, in the process of using those attributes to build groups. And then also a goal of this session is to kind of pull back the covers a little bit to show what's beyond the UI in terms of possibilities as well. So the agenda for this session, what are these intra-ID group attributes? Why do we care about them? We're going to focus then on the intra-ID group attributes in terms of the options that are in the UI. Turn the page a little bit, see what's beyond the UI, and then look at the operators that we can use to help build groups based on those group attributes, and we will then be done. So what are intra-ID group attributes? Well, specifically, the attributes that are available to build groups are going to help us basically focus in on the kind of devices, the kind of users that we want in the group. Group attributes basically are the details about a device, about a user. Could be, for the user, could be their email address, could be their office location, could be their phone number, right? Something that will describe the user that we want to include in the group. For a device, it could be the IMEI, it could be the MAC address, it could be the name, it could be a number of factors, right, that we'll see. And so that's the detail, right? As we talked about in the last session, we can create groups of either users or devices, not both, right? Also, there are some attributes, majority, that are defined by the system. You as the user don't have any control. Certainly you can use those attributes, yes, but you cannot populate those attributes. But there are some attributes, specifically the attributes called extension attributes, that you can define in a way that makes sense for you, right? And then you can use those attributes as part of defining your group. And then attributes, thinking about attributes, group attributes, you might think, you know what, this is really simple, and it is simple, right? As you look in the UI, we'll see the UI in a minute. It is a fairly simple concept, but it's also not just simple. There's some things that are going on more than meets the eye, some things that you can do with attributes if you kind of turn the page beyond the UI that I want to show you. So yes, it's simple, but it's also not something that we stop at when we think of just being simple, right? There's some other things too. So why do we care about these attributes, right? Well, a couple of reasons. One, with these attributes, we can create groups that are very custom, right, to your needs by combining attributes in a few different ways. You can really get into some specific focus for helping you define groups as you think about delivering your configurations, right? One of the things that sometimes you might think about is, well, how do I, stage maybe a series of deployments? And that's a whole different discussion, but you can achieve that by using groups in kind of a creative way, maybe putting some automation behind it. So there's a lot that goes into the strategy, and attributes are part of that. Attributes give you the flexibility, right, to choose what makes sense to you in the right combination to achieve your results, right? You can be very granular with attributes. You can have some enhanced capabilities by combining your own attributes and the extension attributes combined with what is available in the UI, what's available beyond the UI. So a lot here, as you'll see as we start to pull the covers back. Now, I'm going to start in PowerPoint. I'm going to then translate this over to showing this to you in the UI, right? But there are, focusing just on the UI, there's a good number of attributes that are available to us to be able to create groups, right? And in the world of attributes, we're really focused in on dynamic groups, right? Here are user attributes that are available to you to build groups. I'm not going to go define every one of these. A lot of these are very obvious from the name of the attribute. What I will say is a number of these attributes are different data types. So the Boolean, either true or false, right? Account enabled, that's either true or false. DirSync enabled, that's either true or false. And so we need to know what these attributes are, what kind of data these attributes contain, so that we can craft the group membership rules effectively. And I'll show that to you in a minute. So date time. So there is the employee hire date is date time. There are a couple of these attributes that are string collections, basically arrays of data, right, that you can hone in on. The vast majority of them are going to be string attributes, right? So I call these out here just to point them out, right? There's also device attributes. Now, we chatted in session 1 that there were user, and you can create dynamic user, dynamic device groups. We're going to focus on devices from here. I'm not going to talk about user anymore. Not to say that user is not important. It can be. But the same concepts that apply to device also apply to user. So we'll focus in on device because it tends to be that device groups are the more common, right? So in the UI, here are the attributes available for devices. And so we'll have Boolean as well. We'll have the account enabled. We'll have is rooted. Both of those are going to be true or false, either rooted or it's not. It's either enabled or it's not, right? I don't see any date time attributes here kind of in the default list. I do see string collections. There's something called system labels that you can use. And I'll use system labels as an example of one of those that it makes, there's not a lot of documentation on what system labels is. And frankly, I don't know what all data can be contained in system labels device attribute. But what I do know is that there's some data in there that could be useful in your environment. And so one theme that you'll hear as we go along, I'll show you how to do this in a minute, is it is very helpful as you think about the kind of attributes that you might want to use to know what kind of data is going to be contained in those attributes, right? There's a way to, I mean, certainly in the UI, you can actually say, I want to use system labels and then say, whatever is in there. But then if you don't know what kind of data is contained with these attributes, it's going to make it a bit hit and miss to even know if you can use something to your advantage. And so there is a way where we can go through and dump out all of the information that's in some of these. I'll show you that in a minute. I'm struggling here because some of this you have to use PowerShell to be able to pull that data out, right? It would be nice if in the Intune UI, we would show you every value that's available for a given attribute, and we just don't. It's not there, right? You can get to it with PowerShell, but to fully discover all of the data that you can use to build out your groups, right? It's a good thing to do to know what's in each one. And so I want to show you how to do that. I will do that in a minute so that you can kind of see what's in. This is one that it would be useful to see what's in this value in your environment. In my small lab, I have a couple of different values that will be useful, but there's more that could be in this particular array, right? And then the rest of these are going to be string values. And let me say this too, right? As I've approached, this topic, I kind of mentally know that I could be describing this not as well as my goal is to describe this in a way that's very understandable. But I do know as I describe this, there could be some things that are not as clear as I want them to be. And it's not intentional if that's the case, and I apologize if it is. But my goal in this session is not necessarily to have you have every single answer to every question that you might have about group attributes. But my goal in this session is to show you a little bit about what's possible, what's in the UI, what's beyond the UI, what's beyond, what's out there that might not be immediately obvious, to kind of give you a flavor of, there is a world out here of things you can do with attributes that may not be obvious at first blush, right? If you leave with that understanding, then I feel like I've met my objective for this session. But let's keep going, right? So these are the attributes that are in the UI. And with these attributes, we can do a tremendous amount of things, but there are other things that we'll get to in a minute as well. Now, I'm going to pull in Intune real quick because I've actually gone through and kind of defined some groups. I'm not going to go through every single one, but I do want to show you in the UI an example. So I've got some device properties. I just went through again and used this to define a few examples in the UI of what we have. So if I look under dynamic membership rules, you'll see a first group. Now, there's a few things here in the UI that I want to point out. First of all, you can build a group using a single attribute if you want to, right? So if you just wanted to build a group using the account enabled attribute, you can, no problem. In this little rule builder, you can have up to 5 attributes in the UI in combination. Now, I'm not saying the combination here makes any sense at all. I'm just kind of putting them in place to kind of show. But the other thing that I want to show is as you're building the rule in the UI, we're actually building the query that describes what you've built up top, right? There are certain things that you might want to use a query to do that you can't do in the UI, right? An example of that would be in Autopilot. There's an attribute called ZTDID. There's nothing in the UI called ZTDID, right? I mean, there is. I'll show you how that translates to the UI in just a minute. But the instructions you'll find in different articles is to build a rule using ZTDID down in the rule syntax area, right? Instead of using the UI. So that's one place that you might want to do that, right? There are other examples as well, and we'll kind of scratch the surface on that a little bit as we get further, into the session. So this is one example. Now, the other thing that's interesting here is, again, there are different data values. Like this is a Boolean, and this is a string, and this is a string, and so on. This is Boolean. And so if you use the wrong data type for the property, right, or the combination property operator, whatever, then we will, when you go to save this, we'll do a little bit of checking just to make sure that the logic that you kind of built into this makes sense. It's not to say that the results you get back are going to be exactly what you want. No. That will just be you trying a little bit of trial and error in some cases to get the exact result you want. But we want to at least do a little bit of precursor checking to make sure that what you've built is going to work for you, right? And so you might get an error when you try to save a rule because of the attribute combinations and so on not being valid. And that goes along with data type and different things. So just know that, right? But this is an example of using the different values and so forth, right? And I've got, the other values as well. I'm not going to belabor the point. you can go through them all yourself. But just a quick look at that. Let me pull this out of the way and keep going here, right? Okay. So now that's what's in the UI. And you can do the drop downs. You can see all the different values. I listed them out for you in the PowerPoint. But there are a good number of attributes that are available that are not listed in the UI, right? And this is where we need to get into a little bit of a discussion of how attributes actually are defined, who owns what attributes, and so on. So we talked about in session 1 that groups themselves are a component of Entra ID, right? Azure AD, whatever. But other tools such as Intune will leverage groups. Well, in the same sense, there are attributes that are provided by Entra ID, and there are attributes that are provided by Intune. And depending on the context of where you are, you can actually query and make use of those attributes in different ways, right? In some cases, there are attributes that are defined by Intune that actually are copied up to and made available for use in Entra ID, but not in every case. In fact, it's only a handful of attributes that Intune defines and owns that are possible to query and so forth in the UI and all that for building groups. And that's a whole separate discussion, knowing what attributes are defined where and so forth. There's a lot of discussion that we could have about how to make use of those different attributes. The goal here, again, is not to solve every question that you have, but to kind of illustrate for you where these attributes live, where they're defined, and then from there we can decide, how do we leverage using these attributes? Are they going to be used to build groups? Are they going to be used in reporting, et cetera, et cetera? And those are discussions that are beyond the context of what we're doing here. I just want to show this to you. So beyond the UI, so those attributes that are owned by Entra ID that generally can be used to build groups and so forth are all of these, right? All of these. And certainly you see a number here that are not in the UI. I mean, certainly some that are account enabled, that's in the UI, right? Is compliant, that's going to be in the UI, but there's going to be things here that aren't, right, in the UI. So anyway, then there's a whole slew of things that are defined by Intune itself, right? Intune being that Azure, a component of Azure, but kind of a compartment unto itself. We will define attributes that are interesting to our purposes, right? And so here's a whole list of those, and there's actually 2 pages of these, right? So here's the second set of things that are kind of unique to the Intune environment. Again, sometimes a few of these attributes will be made available up in Entra ID, not all of them, right? But there could be different purposes of which you want to use these attributes for Intune itself, not just for defining group membership and so forth. So how do I get the list, right? One thing that would be very interesting is to know what kind of data is contained in each one of these attributes that I might want to leverage, right? Being able to see that these attributes are available. If you're just looking at the UI, you won't see these attributes. And so there needs to be a way that you can actually pull back every attribute that's out there so that you know what's possible. And the way to do that is with PowerShell. I'll get to that in just a minute. But here's what I'm trying to describe to you verbally. I'll do it in a picture. Maybe that will help too, right? There are, sorry, let me go back. We're looking at a device, right? Now again, yes, there's user stuff, but as I mentioned, we're focusing on device. Right? We're going to look at the device, and there's a set of attributes that are provided by Entra ID that you could use to build groups and so forth. There's a substantial number of attributes that are provided by Intune that might be interesting to you, that you might want to access with code or for reporting or for different purposes, right? That's a whole different subject. Some of these attributes, all of these attributes together are used to uniquely describe the device. Some of these attributes from the Intune side are made available so that you can actually build groups based on the value of those attributes. Not all of them at all, right? But some. Also, there's some interesting detail about some of these attributes and how you would see them in different places. So, for example, in Autopilot, we have group tag information possibly that you will use whenever you're importing devices into Autopilot, right? You'll have every device that's Autopilot enabled is going to have a ZTD ID. Well, if you look at the list of attributes, you're not going to find one called group tag. You're not going to find one called ZTD ID. But what you will find is an array value called physical ID. And that's where you're going to find the ZTD ID, and that's also where you're going to find the group tag. Right? There's an array called system labels that we'll focus on in a minute, where it's interesting to know what data is available, right, in here, so that maybe you want to use that to help craft a group membership, a dynamic rule accordingly, right, and so on, right? So I'll show you that. But the combination of these attributes is what's going to make up the totality of the descriptors about a device. Hope that makes sense. Okay. So how would you go about if you wanted to see, right? You can't go into the UI and see the value associated with every single one of these attributes. You won't even see every single one of these attributes listed in the UI. So where would you find a total list of these attributes if you wanted to? And then what would you use to find out what the value of these attributes actually is? And so that's where we turn the page, and we might look at an example in PowerShell. Now, this is a quick example of a PowerShell script that I would use. You could do this a couple of different ways to call out in PowerShell and reach out with Graph API and get these values. So let me show you real quick an example of the script. Let me just grab the script. So here is the PowerShell script. And again, don't get worried about exactly what I'm doing. This is kind of specific to my environment. But this is one way that you could do this. So in my PowerShell script, the command lists that I'm going to use are going to be in the Microsoft Graph module. If you don't have that, this is how you can install the module. There's actually an app registration that I'm using to access the data in my PowerShell environment. Here's the tenant ID for my tenant. And then here's the permissions that I'm giving to the enterprise app, or the app registration, if you will. I'm connecting into my Graph environment, providing the tenant ID, the client ID, and the scopes right here. And then what I want to do, there's a couple of calls up here that I've commented out. The ones that I care about right now, I want to pull specifically the Intune device attributes. And the way I do that is by using the Graph method, calling manage devices. That's specific to Intune. And I'm going to output that to a file. And then I want to get a list of the Entra ID device attributes. And I'll use, that's going to be called with the devices Graph API call. I will spit that out to a file as well. I'll run this. It should be fine. I don't think I'll need to provide any login detail. I think it's cached from previous runs. Yeah, there we go. So I've basically written out my device attributes into a temp folder. So let's go find that temp folder real quick, and we will look at the output, right? So temp folder. Here we go. So here are the ones that are provided by Intra ID itself. And not only do I list the device attributes, I will list the values as well. No need for that. Close that, right? So basically here, let me show you. Let me find the next iteration of account enabled. And so this whole list right here, from this value upwards, these are all of the attributes uniquely defined for one single device, right? So I can scroll up here, and we'll be able to see account-enabled Boolean, true or false. Not all of these are populated because not all of these are applicable to the device type. There could be Windows, iOS, Android in here, Mac OS, whatever, right? So in this case, this is a Windows device. You'll see some different things. Trust type. This is an Azure AD joined only. Compliance status is profile type, right? You'll see host names. Now, names, plural. So this could be an array, as noted by the opening and closing brace, right? In this case, there's only one value, but it could be an array. Physical IDs, right? This is the attribute that I mentioned will contain potentially ZTD ID. It also will contain group tag. Here you see the hardware ID, the user hardware ID, etc. You see some ... at the end. There's more to it than I'm showing right here, right? But you see that. You'll see other information in here, such as system labels. In this case, I don't have anything in system labels, but I will have in another place. Extension attributes. Now, this one's interesting. Extension attributes here is represented as an array, right? And then you will see also that it'll be listed out individually in another place, right? Okay, so let's keep scrolling down, right? I'll just show you in system labels. Let's keep searching for this. In system labels, I will have some interesting values. Now, again, if this is my lab, and I don't know all of the different values that could be populated in system labels. This is one of those attributes that's interesting because different products that you might be using could put data here. Intune can put data here. We will use this field to describe unique characteristics of a device. Like in this case, I know this is a cloud PC. The other example that I have would be for Azure Virtual Desktop. And those are the only two values I know that are here. I've heard of some other values that might be here. That's why it's interesting to dump out these attributes and actually see what's in them. There could be some values in here that you could use that you may not even realize you could use because you don't know what's in there, right? Here's another example of Azure Virtual Desktop, right? So if I'm in an environment with Azure Virtual Desktop and I really want to segment out and say, you know what, I need a group with all of the Azure Virtual Desktops, system labels would be a way to get to that, right? Anyway, right, so these are the ones provided by Intra ID. Now, there's a whole other list of attributes provided by Intune. So let's look at that. Come on. All right, here's the list of those combined or provided by Intune. So let me search for EAS device. And the next iteration of that, this will be the second machine. So let's go down there. And now all of these are for one machine. Again, not all of them are populated. They contain different information and so forth, right? But what's interesting as we start to scroll down is we learn a little bit about what's in here, right, for a given device. Okay. All right. So enough about that. Again, I'm not planning or trying to answer every single question. I'm just trying to show you what is possible, what is a little bit maybe more than meets the eye, so to speak, in doing some of this stuff. So we'll go ahead and get rid of all of this. Don't care. And so we're back, right? So those are the attributes. So knowing what attributes are out there available to you, what values are contained in those attributes can really be important, instructive, helpful, etc. Now, knowing what attributes are there is good, but knowing then how to use those attributes to achieve the result you want is also critical. And the way that you decide what to do with those attributes or to manipulate the data that those attributes contain is by using these operators. And so in Intune, the operators are right alongside the, sorry, that's the wrong window. The operators are right alongside the actual attributes as you're defining things. So let me pull that in just for a second. So back to our groups. If we look then at one of our groups, create a new group, whatever, right? Then we will set this to dynamic device, and then we'll go down, create a dynamic query. And then we will have not only our list of properties, so I'll just pick one, but then we will have an operator type that we will choose. And most of these are self-explanatory, right? Some of them aren't. And I made reference to the fact that whenever you are creating rules, that we will verify the syntax of the rule, not again verifying that you're going to get the exact membership you want. That's up to you. But to verify that the combination of property and operator and so forth value all makes sense, right? So again, most of these are self-explanatory. Some of them are not, like add, right? So if I want to add one, just to create the expression, right? What's interesting is you may not know what this is, but or how to describe it in query form, but as you're adding values, once you complete an expression, we will put into the rule syntax section what equivalent expression that would translate to, right? And so if I add an expression here and choose, I don't know, just this, I will go down to the bottom and choose subtract. Now, this expression I'm building wouldn't necessarily make sense, but my point in showing it to you is that sometimes, add translates to a dash plus, subtract translates to a dash minus, and so if you don't know what the operator value translates to in query form, we'll show it to you, right? So you might think add would translate to a dash add. That's not necessarily true. It could be true, if we add the expression, I don't know, keep going, choose an operator in, right? It could be, again, these expressions don't make sense, but just to show you this, it could be that the operator actually matches, the operator name actually matches the name that's in the expression, like in this case. But in these two cases, subtract, the operator in the expression is different, right? Just so you can kind of use that to learn, right? That's the point. But the operators, I'm not going to go through every single one, but there are a couple that I want to call out that may not be familiar. Like, for example, the add operator. So basically what this is going to do is it's going to be used in something like the device OS version field, if you will. And in that field, if kind of a use case scenario for that is if you want to build a scenario where you want to include devices with a specific OS version or exclude devices with a certain OS version, you can do that. So if you're managing Windows devices and want to create a group of devices running the newer OS version, you can use this value to include that, right? The all operator might not be something that you're familiar with. And so you could use this to basically say, I want to include devices with all of a certain value set, right? And then you can define that value set. Or, any would be kind of in the same realm. So all of them might say, I want all devices that have all of these values, maybe 5 different values, and the device has to have all 5 of them. Or any would be those same values, and if the device has any of those values, then you're good, right? Subtract is kind of the same thing with the OS version thing that we talked about with add, right? And so again, most of these are self-explanatory. but I wanted to call those ones out. Now, at the bottom of this page, I say, from this list, is there anything that is missing that you would expect to actually be present that is not present, right? And the answer is, yeah, there is. There's one that comes to mind that you would expect to be here. Based on the pattern of what you see, you would expect it to be here, but it's not. And that is the value contains. In the UI, we actually have in the dropdown a value of not contains, but there is no entry for contains, right? So these fields are interesting, or these operators could be interesting, because I've talked about there's in the list of attributes, there are arrays of values that might be interesting. System labels is one that I called out as having values that might be interesting. Also, physical IDs is an array that I called out as being interesting because it contains ZTD and also group tag information. So if you wanted to build a query rule, or a rule, I should say, that uses a contains operator, say, hey, if it contains this value or that value or this other value, that could be useful, right? And it could, right? You absolutely can use a query using contains. You have to write it yourself and use the dash contains. And here's the reason I believe it's not in the UI, right? When you use contains, it is a bit more heavy-handed on the back end. And so we don't want to just put in front of you contains so that it's used frequently, right? The idea is you want to be purposeful about it. And so if you want to use it, we do let you have that option, but you have to use it in a query kind of format just to make sure that we're not overusing dash contains. All right, so enough about that. Okay, and I've shown you, I've already kind of shown you the operators in the UI, so we'll go on. As we're starting to wrap up the session, right? Again, as I'm even describing this, I realize there's things that you might be wondering, what about this, what about that I'm not covering. And I understand that, and because there's a lot that's here, right? There may even be some confusion about what I'm talking about, and I understand that too, and that's not the intention at all, right? If at the end of this session I've actually, my goal in doing this session, let me say it this way, is to certainly show you some things in the UI related to attributes, and then also show you that there's a world of possibilities with attributes that are beyond the UI. And there's attributes that kind of fit together to totally describe devices that are not maybe obvious from the UI. If I leave you with that understanding, and then also leave you with the realization that, there are things possible that you can leverage to achieve your results that are not limited to the UI, then I feel like I've been successful, right? There are discussions we can have beyond this around these attributes and around building groups and around how these can be used in reporting and around how these can be used in PowerShell. And I get it, right? And I'm not able to cover that, here. But hopefully this gives you some knowledge to go forward and maybe do more than what you thought maybe you could do, right? So as we're starting to wrap the session up, wanted to comment about that, and then wanted to talk quickly about a few tips and tricks, right? We're not really in the troubleshooting realm right now, but just to review a couple of things in terms of what we've talked about. And one of those is dynamic groups, right? So again, creating dynamic groups for devices or for users, very flexible, right? By creating a rule, just a single rule, you'll get a lot, right? Being able to add multiple rules, as I showed you, and doing queries, very useful, right? In that, right? When you're creating dynamic groups, it's going to be either users or devices, not both, right? Okay, so as you're using operators, there's going to be a precedence of operations for these operators, and I'm illustrating it hopefully here, right? Here's the highest level of precedence at the top down to the bottom. And so all the operators that are on the same line here, those are going to be equivalent with each other. And then highest to lowest here. There is, as you're building these expressions in the UI, there is going to be some validation that happens just to make sure that we don't hit a blind alley by what we're creating. We want to make sure that the property and the operator and the value that you're putting in, at least syntactically or I don't know, mathematically or whatever makes sense, right? So we'll do that. We're not going to guarantee the outcome of what you do. That's up to you, but we're not going to let you save something that's just doesn't make sense to the query engine, right? And then finally, is there support for using null in the query expression? The answer is yes, right? There can be very good reasons to use null in your query expressions, as kind of shown here. User.mail does not equal null. That's what I'm saying here. So this could be an example where you're just wanting to create an expression to say, give me all the users that have something in the mail attribute, right, as an example. So again, lot of stuff here, a lot more hopefully than meets the eye. There's a lot to work with here, and working with it, it should become clear how to use it. That's where I'm going to end the session for now. We will call that session 2 on attributes, and we will see you in session 3.